Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for sticking around. We've got a lot more going on here. It's time now for our fireside chat with Brian Calka from DTE, along with our own Christophe Mangin, the Managing Director from the Electric Vehicle Center. So welcome them to the stage.
This is the last stretch, a few more presentations before the end. My name is Christophe Mangin. I'm the Managing Director for the Electric Vehicle Center. And we have next to you, Brian.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so just to start, I'd like to ask Brian a few questions. And the first one is, well, who are you? What do you do? And what brought you so far in a very successful career? I know that you are from alumni from the University of Michigan, and so describing a little bit what contributed to all of this, and please provide the introduction.
Well, first off, thank you for having me here today. It's awesome to be with all of you here in the building today. I'm a native Michigander. I grew up in Livonia, actually. So about 20 miles to the east of Ann Arbor, live in Northville right now. And as Christophe said, I'm a dual degree. I have a degree in electrical engineering from the University of Michigan Dearborn, and then I received my MBA here at the Ross School of Business. So my employment is across two companies, which is quite ironic given the topic we're talking about here today. I started off at Ford Motor Company. I was a manufacturing engineer. I ran production lines and transmission plants. I did that for about 5 years. And then back in 2006, I made the transition to DTE. And I've had a number of roles in my now about 20-year career at DTE. Been in finance, been in corporate strategy. I've been in renewable energy. And about half of my time at DTE has been spent in what we call our distribution operations business unit. In other words, that's our poles and our wires business. So you think about crews out there trimming trees, putting poles in the ground, responding to outages during storms. That's what my organization does. So to answer your second question about kind of how U of M has played a role in my life, I'm a diehard U of M fan, both from an academic standpoint, but from a medical standpoint as well. I've had some family members with significant medical conditions that required the service of U of M, and obviously did remarkable work for them all. But to me, what U of M did is obviously building a lot of relationships. I have a lot of friends and colleagues who are all over the industry right now that I can lean on when I need to. And you think about pushing yourself to your limit academically and how you think. Being in class, being next to the smartest people around really helps you and pushes you to become the best individual that you can be. And I obviously had that opportunity during my time at U of M. So,
thank you, Brian. Well, clearly, DTE is a leading electric service provider in this part of Michigan, at least. What are how are you planning for the arrival of this electric vehicle, and what are you preparing everything around it at the moment?
That's a big question. I think it's a multi-part answer. And the way that I like to think about electric vehicles is that they're only going to be as good as the availability of the electrons needed to charge them, okay? And if you think back a couple of years ago, back 21, 22, 23, we were struggling at DT with respect to keeping the lights on, and when they went off, getting them back on in a timely manner. And we were in the media. We took our lumps, and rightfully so, and we actually used that as a way to chart a path forward and trying to improve the reliability of the grid, because we obviously recognize that is so critical for electric vehicle adoption and having the confidence that electric vehicles can be utilized here in Southeast Michigan. So we are investing billions of dollars a year into the electric grid. You think about what that means. We're installing a number of what I'll call intelligent devices or smart devices across the grid that allows us to see what is going on, allows us to reroute power when the power does go out. We're trimming 6,000 miles of trees every single year. We're hardening our grid by installing bigger poles and the like. And quite frankly, it's working, right? You're hopefully seeing a little bit of that improvement in your everyday life. Maybe there's a few people in the room here who have still struggled, and I'd like to know who those people are afterwards so I can hopefully add some value there. And I think about the latest example of some of the improvements we've made. If you go back a week and a half ago, Friday the 13th, we had winds here in Southeast Michigan that quite frankly were unprecedented. We had 18 hours of 55-mile-an-hour winds. 18 hours. Very unique windstorm in our history. The only comparable windstorm to that was back in March of 2017, if any of you recall that storm. Similar kind of wind speeds, a little bit shorter in duration. Those were about 8 hours. That storm back in 17 resulted in about 750,000 people out of power. It took us 9 or 10 days to get the lights back on. Right? You compare that to what happened 10 days ago. 300,000 people out of power. We had the lights on in two days. Obviously, we recognize people lost power and that's a hardship, but you can see the improvements that we're trying to make, and we recognize we have a long ways to go still. The other angle I would say is, how do we think about it from a localized standpoint, right? If we have penetration of electric vehicles in a community, in a neighborhood, on a block, how are we recognizing where that penetration is at, and what are we doing to respond? We have a lot of talented engineers in our company, lots of talented engineers, and they have really good visibility to where these various load centers are at on our grid. We can tabulate all of the load that are going through certain meters on our grid, and we can roll them up to the nearest transformer, et cetera. So we can proactively identify where we're getting to the capacity of that local area and then change out a transformer. Or if we see a community or a larger area growing with electric vehicles, we can propose substations or larger pieces of equipment that will allow us to meet that demand. I'm proud to say right now, we don't have examples where communities are trying to add electric vehicle chargers, they're trying to do some of that work, and we can't support them. Because generally speaking, we are trying to be ahead of them and trying to invest in the grid to allow that to happen naturally.
Thanks. In the continuation of this, there is a lot of misinformation about what's going on with the energy providers and the effort you do, because it's very complex. Where is your point of view or your estimate from DTE point of view about the grid capability to sustain what's going to happen? I mean, the forecast is tempering a little bit as we have at the moment, but it's coming, and therefore, what is today's evaluation of the grid capability to support, and what do you think the long-term view is going to look and the capability for DTE specifically to contain this big demand coming your way?
Obviously, the demand profile is ever changing, right? If you predict something the next hour, it's going to be different, and your previous prediction is wrong. Right now, we're somewhere in the 13-ish% of all new vehicles sold in our territory are electric in nature, so 13-ish%. Over the next 3 to 4 years, we expect that to grow maybe to 16, 17%. By 35, it grows to 26%, and then it gets up into the 30% of all new vehicles sold by the end of, we'll call it the next decade. By the end of the next decade, we're forecasting somewhere 1 in every 4 vehicles in our territory will be electric vehicle, an electric vehicle. So it does give us a little bit of a ramp, and it gives us that opportunity to kind of predict where we're going to go, and we can put strategic initiatives in place to be able to meet that demand. I'm sure we're going to talk about it at some point. You think about that demand versus like the data center demand. That's growing exponentially at many, many multiples of what the electric vehicle demand. Like for us, if you think about full penetration of electric vehicles 15 years down the road, that'll probably increase the load that we serve right now in Southeast Michigan by 15%, 15%. So it's not going to be a complete overhaul of everything. We're going to have to do some work to be able to meet that demand. But the way that I see it right now, just the ramp of that is going to give us a lot of time to plan accordingly.
So do you think this is a logistic thing, so the amount of funding that is required to do the upgrades, or is there also a technology requirement where there is some barrier in the kind of transformers, or the, is there a technology aspect that will be part of that revolution?
The ability to generate power and transmit it over power lines to a home or business, it's been generally the same since the beginning of time, right? Transformers are transformers. Maybe at some point in time, there'll be some sort of like novel way to transform electricity down to voltages that are needed for electric vehicles. I don't think we've necessarily figured it out yet, and I don't think anybody has figured it out yet. I think for us, it's going to be just continuing to recognize where the demand is going to be at and continuing to put thoughtful plans together that we can then go and implement in certain areas. So for example, let me give you a little bit of color on our grid. So we've got 45,000 line miles of cable and wire in our service territory, 45,000 miles of it. About a third of it is an old vintage electrical construction standard that back in its time in the 40s and 50s won a ton of awards. Right now, it does not have the capacity to actually support electrification, including electric vehicles. And what we're doing is we're slowly converting those particular areas of our grid over to the new electrical standard. Some of the transformers out there, we call them an ungrounded delta winding configuration in the transformer. We've got to change those out into a Y configuration, which is a grounded configuration for the double E's in the room here. That will provide the support, and that'll allow this electrification to happen without impediments for those particular customers who want to do that.
So following up a little bit, as you see, we're going to get into the data centers and what is disturbing the overall energy requirement. It seems that the data center is exploding right now, as you just alluded to. Is there other elements that are making the constraint on the top of the electric vehicle revolution? Is there things that is going to increase consumption, and therefore is this competing with each other? And are we, as electric vehicle group here, going to be kind of constrained by the ability of getting the electricity to the vehicle?
The short answer is no. We file every couple of years what's called an integrated resource plan, IRP for short. We'll file our next one here 3 or 4 months from now. And really what that looks at is a supply and demand model of where do we think all the demand is going to come from? Data centers and electric vehicles and other traditional load centers, right? The amount of grow houses in our communities are growing too. Like that's putting pressure on the local grid as well, as an example. And then we have to figure out the supply. Now, whether that's the construction of new plants, if that is what we call demand response, incentivizing people to reduce their power in peak periods of the day to allow these generation units to continue to generate. Like those are the types of things that we have to do, but we've signed the 2 data centers, right? We've got Oracle and Google as the 2 data centers that have been recently announced. We have adequate capacity to support them from a generation standpoint while supporting every other customer with a margin on top of that. So it's not like we're on a razor's edge here. We'd have adequate capacity to support all of this incremental load. You do get to a point, and that's what the next IRP is going to help communicate, where you do have to build incremental generation, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's clean natural gas, maybe it's another nuclear plant. We'll find out, but that's what the IRP will help to establish.
Great. That's good news, actually, that you have confidence to be able to deliver the electrons. Can you, I was aware of how the energy, distributor like DTE are regulated. Can you explain a little bit what you can do and what you cannot do in order to be more profitable, and what are the constraints associated with laws and things of that nature?
Yeah, that's a dangerous question, but I'll do my best to answer. So, to your question, we are a regulated utility, right? And what regulated means is that we aren't allowed to price uniquely to all of you here in the room. We have to provide very prescriptive prices for usage for different customer classes. So, and the reason for that is we are a monopoly, right? You think about it, we are a natural monopoly, and all utilities are like that, which a lot of people get a lot of questions, but you're a monopoly, that's unfair. I look at it from two different angles. If we took down every one of our poles, we got 1.1 million poles in our grid. We took down all the wire and all the cable and said, okay, all of you in the room, as a very hypothetical example, go find your electricity provider. Nobody in their right mind is going to construct all the assets needed to generate and to deliver power to individual homes without some critical mass of customers that they can utilize to fund all of that infrastructure. Okay, so that's like the basic rubric behind it. But on the other hand, we view that monopoly as a privilege, right? It is a privilege for us, and we wear that as a badge of honor, and we recognize the position we have, and rest assured, we are laser focused on providing reliable power that's clean, that is affordable. And when you think about the regulation side of things, like I hear a lot of questions, and I might jump into one of the questions you're going to ask here in a minute on the data centers. And we hear across the country that they're increasing cost for the average customer. Here in Michigan, per the law, data centers and the cost to connect them to the grid, none of the costs can be subsidized by anybody. Okay, so what does that mean? Right, for Oracle or for Google, we are going to have to invest billions of dollars for the battery storage, for the renewable energy, for just the interconnection to the grid. They will pay every nickel of what it takes to do all of that. And then they have a rate that they pay every month, which is our standard, it's called the D11 rate if you want to look in our rate book. They will pay a standard rate to cover their cost. Because again, nobody that we serve, the 2.3 million customers, nobody can subsidize anything related to the data centers. It's written in the law, it's written in their commercial contract, and there's no real way around it. So I think it's a misconception. We hear it across the country, and I can't speak for other jurisdictions in the United States, but I can speak to how it's done here in Michigan. And if you read the sales and use tax law, if you read other laws, it's really prescriptive on what we can and cannot do. And I think underpinning all of that is this inability to subsidize data centers coming online.
So I'm going to shift a little bit gears at the moment and focus again on basically the charging aspect of an electric vehicle. It's pretty straightforward to me that, if you have a garage, you put a charger in your garage in collaboration with your energy provider, and you go at it, and then you have a contract with, let's say, DTE, and life is good. How are you dealing with multi-housing situation, or people who actually, on the street in large cities or things of that nature, where delivering the electron is really a challenging situation? It changes things. Is there programs that DTE has in place to actually support that, and doesn't require somebody who wants to have an electric vehicle to buy a house with a garage in order to get things done?
Yeah, it's a good question. The short answer is yes. We have a plan that we have to submit. It was every 4 years. I believe it's going to be every 5 years starting this year, that lays out what I'll call the overall strategy related to electric vehicles. And the way that I like to think about it is a three-legged stool, is we're trying to provide more equitable access to electric vehicles. Right? We recognize that certain individuals have better access to the electric vehicles. We're trying to demystify a little bit of the process and giving that same access to everybody. That's the first. Second is we're trying to just increase or accelerate the EV adoption here in Southeast Michigan. We're part of a number of consortiums. We're doing a lot of work with academics, with the OEMs, trying to figure out ways to accelerate the adoption. And then third is this really cool technology domain. You think about vehicle to house and vehicle to grid. We're really partnering with a lot of key individuals on how do we think about that? What are the barriers to doing that really well? But when you think about the access, right, rebates are something that we have a number of, right? Whether it's income qualified customers, they get a level 2 charger, all the way to fast chargers where there's up to $70,000 rebates depending on the unique circumstance. And if you go to our website, you can see where all the rebates are at. For residential installations, we also partner with a third party from the installation standpoint. And if you go to the website, it walks anyone through in very simple words and simple terms on how to do it. What are the steps they have to take? And we're there to help them along the way. Because what we don't want to have happen is people who are interested in electric vehicles get to the point where they want to actually do something about it and they get overwhelmed by the minutia and the details. And it's really incumbent on us as the utility here to help provide that support and get people to be able to participate to the levels that they want to participate.
So you have a very complex business, right? I mean, it's the installation you describe, how many poles, how many miles, and how to make it better and more affordable and so on. How are you prepared to, or is it something, the return of the electron back to the grid, is it something that you are welcoming potentially, or this is an extra level of complexity that at this point you are not interested in dealing with?
I welcome it, quite frankly. I think we need to do it on some level. When we think about affordability, I mentioned earlier, we want to provide reliable, clean, and affordable electricity. When we think about our generation fleet, we're trying to figure out ways to meet the hottest days of the year. Right? That's really what you're trying to do. That's the worst case situation, is it's 95 at 4 o'clock on a July afternoon and you don't have generation across the Midwest to provide to your customers. So we can go out and spend a couple $1 billion on building a plant that's a natural gas plant or what have you to cover that peak, or we can harness the ability for these electric vehicles to push electrons onto the grid in times of need. It's a great revenue stream for the individuals who have these vehicles and can put them onto the grid, and it prevents us from having to invest a lot of dollars into the grid to otherwise support it. So it's really a localized generation unit, if you will, and it's going to be hugely beneficial for us as a utility, but also for those particular customers. I also think when Mother Nature is rapidly evolving before our eyes, the intensity and frequency of these big storms across the country is ramping pretty quickly here. There are going to be storms that take power lines down, that are going to take a couple of days for people to get their lights on. Having the ability to power your home through your electric vehicle for a couple of days is going to be a better experience for the customer, clearly. And a lot of these vehicles generally will be able to support powering an entire home. We're not talking about feeding it back into your breaker panel and shutting off a couple of circuits. You can leave your main breaker on and everything on, and you're probably going to get 2 to 3 to 4 days of actual energy from the vehicle if it's fully charged. So that's a huge opportunity for us all in terms of the experience that we need to have when it comes to the utility.
Thanks, Brian. You know, we asking often a lot of questions to the utilities. Give you an opportunity to ask the audience that include industry, academia, government that are present in the room. Is there anything that you would like them to help you do?
I guess the way that I think about it, and I get this a lot, is what is the most important thing to move electric vehicles forward? And it's really collaboration. It's the collaboration between the utilities, the OEMs, academia, and everybody in between. The thing I would ask for everybody in this room is, keeping the lines of communication open with the utility. Like, we want to be partners. We don't want to be a reason or a frustration for what everyone else wants to execute on and to participate in. We want to be partners, and we want to be there with you and alongside of you. I'm probably a couple levels removed out of like what the day-to-days are and how we are supporting you, or maybe how we are not. If there's things that we're not doing well or things that we need to sharpen our pencils on, we welcome that. We want to hear from you. We want to understand how we can better support you. Obviously, we have very smart people in our company who want to do what's right to move this particular electrification process forward. So I guess the question would be here, and I don't think we have to get an answer per se, but what more can we do as a company, as your energy provider here in Southeast Michigan, to continue to advance electric vehicles and everything else associated with it?
Well, I think that was a very nice session, Brian. I really appreciate, and I know you're very busy, and you were just coming from downtown and had a few traffic and a few handles, so we're all sweating to make sure you arrive here on time, and you did. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming in.
Appreciate it. Thank you.